Doja Cat and Ice Spice, the latest from Podnews.net with Squadcast. Record remotely in studio quality. Doja Cat and Ice Spice are on the first edition of Close Friends Only, the first podcast from Instagram. The branded show has the two icons diving deep on Instagram, from crazy memes to content from creators they love. It's produced by Sunny Side Up in collaboration with the Unwell Network, and it's out tomorrow. Announced earlier this year, Linkfire has placed its linking tool live for podcasters, giving you one link to share for your show. Uniquely, it offers access to Apple Podcasts Analytics. It's the only third party to do so. We'll link to what a link page looks like in our show notes and our newsletter at podnews.net. We would, though, recommend you get your own website. Podpage is a gold Podnews supporter at podpage.com. Wiser Than Me, hosted by Julia Louis-Dreyfus, was named Apple Podcasts 2023 Show of the Year. Captivate launched support for Apple Podcast subscriptions. They joined Transistor, which announced support last week. Lydia Polgreen, the former managing director of Gimlet Media, has criticised Spotify for cancelling Heavyweight and Stolen. If you can't make a go of it with these incredible shows, you are simply bad at podcasting, she wrote on Threads. She's since deleted the post. Meanwhile, Dan Le Batard, a sports podcast host, claims that Spotify is junking up the numbers and the numbers are jerry-rigged, after a conspiracy theory from a fan that Spotify is deliberately holding back sports shows that aren't from The Ringer. Podcasting is coming to South by Southwest, with Vox Media partnering with the conference to provide an official podcast stage. A number of popular shows will be brought to the stage next March. Embedded players from Listen Notes were preloading audio until yesterday against IAB guidelines. That meant that when your browser loaded a page containing an embedded player, it downloaded the audio in full, which appeared as a valid download in podcast analytics without you listening to it at all. After Podnews reported it, Listen Notes has quickly fixed the issue. It's been a year since Acast launched the company's self-serve ad platform. The senior director of product has looked back at the last year in a blog post today. 40% of advertisers have booked repeat campaigns, and 15% of revenue comes from host-read sponsorships. And it was the first form of advertising for 40% of podcasters on the platform. A former Pushkin Industries employee has written about her experience at the company and why she left. She says the people who are ultimately making the decisions are not the people who know how to make shows. We link to that today in full. Revolver Podcasts and Adori are working to produce podcast fast TV channels on the Roku platform, highlighting multicultural podcasts. And Pocket Casts has published a guide to moving from Google Podcasts using an OPML feed. The company is offering a 50% discount for your first year of Pocket Casts Plus. And thank you to Mark Ramsey and Charles Spivey for becoming our latest personal supporters. Based in Portland, Mark Ramsey makes podcasts for companies like Wondery and iHeart and is an excellent thinker about all things audio. Charles Spivey, or perhaps it's Spivey, works for Louisville Public Media in Kentucky, the owners of 3 radio stations and plenty of podcasts, and also tipped us off for a story in this very edition. Personal supporters make our day, and they lessen our reliance on advertising, thus ensuring our independence. You can be like them and support us at podnews.net/support. And in podcast news, Tyler Goodson has died. In 2017, he pleaded guilty to burglary and theft of items from John B. McLemore, the focus of the popular podcast S-Town. Goodson was shot and killed by Woodstock police after a standoff. Former Bibb County District Attorney Michael Jackson said, unfortunately, he kept living a colourful life. He was 32. The latest episode of Lawfully Creative, hosted by lawyer Annabelle Galberti, features me as a guest. I share my knowledge on the strengths and weaknesses of the podcast sector and my background in the audio industry. On The Town with Matthew Baloney, Bloomberg's Ashley Carman talks about the state of the podcast industry and its struggle to reach profitability despite its growth, and what they call the murky metrics for success. The show was a Spotify original made by The Ringer and Puck. The Greatest True Crime Stories Ever Told is new from iHeart Podcasts and Diversion Audio, hosted by true crime writer Mary Kay McBrayer, who will walk the audience through the most riveting true crime stories ever told. Not only are those stories deeply researched, but many episodes often include interviews with authors and experts on the cases. And the Murder in Boston podcast from the Boston Globe started recently. The newspaper interviewed the host, Adrian Walker, about how the podcast was put together. Trailers for selected shows are in our new Podcast Trailers podcast. Find it wherever you get your podcasts. And this podcast is sponsored by Squadcast. Record your podcasts and videos remotely in studio quality with Squadcast. Then seamlessly send your files to Descript for post-production and social clipping. Get Descript and Squadcast for one price at squadcast.fm. And that's the latest from our newsletter. To read all the stories and subscribe, we're at podnews.net.